Hello and welcome to today's conference of the Schiller Institute for May 9th, the 75th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, which commemorates the victory over fascism. And today's conference is called Commemorate the Victory Against Fascism with a New Bretton Woods System. I also want to welcome our speakers for today. They are Helga Sepp Larouche, founder and chairman of the Schiller Institute, James Jatras, former United States diplomat and former advisor to the Republican Senate leadership, Jacques Cheminade, longtime associate of Lyndon LaRouche in France, former presidential candidate in that nation and head of the organization Solidarity in Progress, and Diane Sayre of New York, founder of the New York City Schiller Institute Chorus, and also a longtime associate of Lyndon LaRouche. Today's commemoration and celebration of the victory over fascism in World War II will be opened by the late Lyndon LaRouche, the co-founder of the Schiller Institute, the leading physical economist and statesman of his time. This is taken from a speech given in New York City in 2003.
Friends, if you look around the world today, you have two pictures. One, a fearful one, a spread of war, threat of war, terror. On the other hand, in Asia in particular, Eurasia in general, there's a new movement, new cooperation among the nations of Asia, steps toward cooperation. Pakistan, India, China, Southeast Asia, Iran, nations of Central Asia, Russia, moving toward Europe. The world is in a great crisis. Great economic crisis. The financial system is in danger of collapse and will collapse. But we can fix that. Governments have the power to fix those kinds of problems. And life will go on. The problem is, above all, is the mind of the people of the world. The other aspect of it, which is important as I see it, around the world today, is pessimism. In the United States, there is great pessimism. There's a fiction of pessimism in politics. What we sometimes call corruption in politics, and it is corruption, is a fruit of pessimism. People say you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. You can't change the way things are going. You can't improve the political system. You can't solve the problems. You've got to learn to live with the problems. Pessimism. And pessimism leads to corruption. And around the world, the same problem. Pessimism. Pessimism in Africa, especially in black Africa. Pessimism in Europe. Pessimism in Eastern Europe. And less so in China. China's more confident. But fear in Korea. Fear what might happen. Fear in Japan. So the most important thing, in my view, in my experience, in leadership is optimism. Not arbitrary optimism, not false optimism, but knowledgeable optimism. The knowledge that we can, if we will, can do the things that have to be done. I know that in the period of World War II, when the United States had gone through a great period of pessimism in the 1920s and early 1930s, we began to come out of that pessimism during the period of the 1930s and the war. We were able to meet the challenge of war and the challenge of the hope of peace, which Roosevelt represented, because there was optimism in the people. I saw things happen in wartime, under wartime conditions, which expressed optimism. Optimism. People would do what they thought was impossible because they were optimistic. I'm confident that the United States can change. It can change from what it is now. It can change quickly. What we're doing now is wrong. But it can change. It doesn't have to go on like this. And I'm determined to bring that change about. And being an older man, I have nothing to fear. And therefore, I can go ahead and do it. I'll try to do it at least. But I think one should not be pessimistic. I know what goes on in the United States. I know the persecution of so-called minority groups. I know the persecution of Islamic populations, of people from Islamic backgrounds. This is a melting pot country. We have everybody in this country. This is not a country of Anglo-Saxons. It's a melting pot nation from all parts of the world, Chinese, Koreans, Mexican-Americans, Spanish-speaking Americans of all kinds, all branches of Europe, Turkey, the Middle East, Egypt, they're all here. This is a melting pot country in which the richness of the country is the fact that we're a melting pot country. We live together, and by living together with cultures and different backgrounds, we have an understanding of what peace means. It means we're united by a common purpose to create a society and a world that works in a certain way. I'm convinced we can do it. And I'm convinced that you should be optimistic too with me. I think we can change this. I'm determined to change it. I think we can succeed.
This commemoration, therefore, is an optimistic commemoration. Larouche's optimistic leadership is exactly what is needed at this time. His design of a four-powers agreement among Russia, the United States, China, and India, especially in the context of the present coronavirus epidemic, is the needed design to catalyze optimism throughout the world. The idea of the Schiller Institute has always been to start from that which is the best in humanity and to make that the basis for a durable peace through mutual economic and cultural development of all nations. And today, to discuss exactly how such optimistic leadership can be created, including among the young people of the world, it's always my honor to introduce Helga Sepp Larouche, chairman and founder of the Schiller Institute.
Yes, hello. I greet all of you. And, on this day, which is both the end of World War II and the defeat over National Socialism, it is actually high time for a very deep reflection, much deeper than people usually have. Now, especially in times of an amazing historical amnesia, where the question of war is almost not present in the minds of people, at least not in the way they should be thinking about it. The older people who still had the experience of World War II are getting old, and few only are alive. For many young people, world wars are not an issue at all. And in the United States, in any case, wars since the Civil War have always been wars somewhere else and not on American territory. So you have a population which is almost sleepwalking into the danger of a new world war. Now, it is therefore of existential importance that we try to, despite the fact that Dennis naturally is right when he says we have to approach it with a sense of optimism. But I also think that in light of the realities of this world and the dangers of a new geopolitical confrontation, it is absolutely necessary to evoke and remind ourselves of what the Second World War actually was, the absolute horrors of that war, and the really importance of what happened when the soldiers of the United States and the soldiers of the Soviet Union met for the first time on the 25th of April in Torgau, or near Torgau at the Elbe. And they reached the hands and they evoked the spirit of the Elbe and made a solemn oath, the oath of Torgau, to swear to never have such a war again and to create a world where people could sleep peacefully without the fear that bombs would fall on their head. Now, the danger is today that we are repeating the mistakes by not paying attention to how these wars came into being. Now, World War II was a collapse into barbarism, which was engulfing the whole world. It was a situation where things happened, crimes happened, which destroyed all ideals of civilization. And it was a war around the whole world. It was 65 states which were involved, directly or indirectly. There were 110 million soldiers under arms. The victims were mostly civilians, altogether 60 million dead people. There was the Holocaust, there were other massacres, there were mass genocides, war crimes. And all of this was the result of the inhuman ideologies of some of the key protagonists and the way how they were manipulated actually on a chessboard, which were orchestrated by the forces of the empire. Now, just to recall, Hitler had the utopian idea to create a 1,000-year Reich, which people who were reading Mein Kampf and other writings could have known, even so later it was found Mein Kampf was not read so much. Then you had the Tanaka Memorial of 1927 from Japan, which had a concrete plan for world conquest. And as a result, you had a tremendous suffering of people in Russia who lost altogether 27 million people. And the Great Patriotic War and its memory is therefore why that day, today, is the greatest holiday in Russia. For Germany, you had the total capitulation, unconditional surrender, and it took that country 35 years to come around to the idea which was introduced by then President Richard von Weizsäcker, that this date, the 8th of May, was actually the day of liberation for Germany and not the day of the end of World War II or capitulation, which implied the idea that the Germans were also, or many Germans were also the victims of National Socialism, which was not a self-evident idea immediately in the post-war period. Now, almost completely blended out in the West is the fact that China was the country which had the second largest number of casualties, where the Japanese aggression, which had started in 1937, which led to unbelievable battles of brutality, the massacre of Nanjing, which is still, one of the absolute horrors of the Chinese population. That war lasted even longer, till the 2nd of September 1945. Now, why am I saying that this was not just these, protagonists like Japan, Germany, Italy, and so forth, but that there was geopolitical manipulation? While EIR has documented in great detail the role of the British in manipulating the chessboard, which then led to World War I, including the ouster of Bismarck, the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905, the two Balkan Wars, and finally the shots of Sarajevo, which was just the trigger, but not the cause of this war. We should also remember that the manipulation occurred already before World War II by some people financing Hitler to come to power, among them the then governor of the Bank of England, Montagu Norman, and the eugenic faction in the United States around Averell Harriman, who was convinced that the racist aims of Hitler were perfectly in line with their intention. So we know that some people who had studied Hitler's intention, Mein Kampf and other writings, knew that you just had to put Hitler into power and a war with the Soviet Union sooner or later would be inevitable. There was just now an article in Sputnik by one of their journalists and former BBC correspondents, Chris Summers, who reports that Churchill, within hours after Roosevelt died on the 12th of April in 1945, basically ordered his imperial general staff to draft a war plan against the Soviet Union. Now, fortunately, this was rejected by the American Joint Chiefs, but it took only 2 more weeks until Truman invited him 2 weeks after the meeting in Torgau, which had evoked the spirit of the Elbe, that Truman had actually invited Churchill to come to Fulton, Missouri, where he delivered his infamous Iron Curtain speech, which launched the Cold War. And actually, since that time, the world has lived in one form or another under the Damocles sword of nuclear war. We should keep that memory in mind when we look at the very important difference between the joint communique between President Trump and President Putin for the occasion of today, where both of them said that this meeting in this event in the end of World War II and the meeting of Torgau is an example that our nations, meaning the United States and Russia, can cooperate, that they can put aside differences, build trust, and cooperate in the pursuit of greater causes. They say, as we work today to confront the most important challenges of the 21st century, we pay tribute to the valor and courage of all of those who fought together to defeat fascism. Their heroic feat will never be forgotten. Pompeo, on the other side, chose a different narrative by putting out a joint statement with the foreign ministers of Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, the Baltic countries, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, which is a completely geopolitical narrative with the connotation of anti-communism, anti-Russia, equaling Russia with communism implicitly. So let's go to what are the great challenges of this century. Well, you have the pandemic, which is unprecedented and causing havoc not only in the casualties of the people dying from coronavirus, but also with the effects of the economic shutdown, causing an unprecedented effect to the world economy, where about half of it is locked down. And now you have an increasing rebellion in some countries where the population no longer agrees that these measures are necessary. And, actually some of the authorities are fearing a murmur of mass opposition and implicitly chaos. Now, that's just one aspect. This intersects with incredible economic effects. The ILO, the International Labour Organization, just published figures saying that 60% of all jobs in the world, that is 2 billion of 3.3 billion jobs, are actually the informal economy. Now, under conditions of lockdown, that means that these people who are living from the hand to the mouth are thrown overnight into an absolute crisis of not having enough to eat. Now, in Africa, the informal economy is 86%, 50% in India, and there, where the lockdown already takes place since the end of March, it is an absolute social crisis which is building up. Now, on top of that comes reports from the World Food Programme that we are looking at the danger of a world famine. On the 21st of April, David Beasley, the director of the World Food Programme, briefed the UN Security Council that we are heading towards a famine of biblical dimensions. Now, what that means is already before this crisis erupted, 821 million people are living in permanent food insecurity. The World Food Programme, as in the past, gave food relief for 80 million of those people. And because of the pandemic and escalation of many other crises, this number is jumping up to 265 million a year. Now, if this famine would fully develop, as Mr. Beasley is warning, the death rate of famine could go up to 300,000 people a day. Now, if food can be mobilized, it can be averted, but that danger clearly exists. In Africa, there are 194 million people in need of food supplies in 37 nations. In Asia, it's 61 million in 10 nations. In Latin America, it's 33 million in 6 nations. Now, the problem is that because of the crisis of agriculture, the tonnage needed to relieve this shortage may not be there. Farmers in the United States and in Europe are protesting that, because of the policies of the EU, which imposes completely unreasonable conditions on the farmers, their existence is threatened. So large tractorcades were already going in the streets since last fall. In the United States, many farms are in danger of going out of business. There is now, because of the coronavirus crisis, a shortage developing where food is being rationed, meat is rationed in the United States. Food processing and meat packing plants are being closed down because of the infection of the employees. Now, these are not things which cannot be remedied, but they demand a very urgent action. Now, if there is one lesson from the defeat of over National Socialism and the fact that 2 world wars happened, we absolutely have to put aside all geopolitical confrontation, all secondary issues, and go back to the spirit of Torgau and the oath of the soldiers from Russia, from the Soviet Union and the United States at the time, to create a peaceful world. Now, that is why the Schiller Institute, in the spirit of Lyndon LaRouche, is calling for a 4-power agreement, and why we are having an international mobilization, including an effort to get the use of this word mobilized to this effect, to demand with a chorus of countries and forces around the world that the 4 most important countries of the world must make an emergency summit and fix the world system. Where should the solution come from, if not from the most powerful governments? The United States, Russia, China, and India, supported by other nations, must fix this situation. There is no other place. The G20, well, they had the chance. There are too many forces who are moving in different directions. The G7, you can almost forget. Other regional organizations, as valuable as they may be, like the BRICS, the SCO, other organizations I could name, but you have to have a powerful combination of countries which has the power together to force the change of the system. Now, what are these changes which are necessary? I think the obvious immediate one is we need a world health system. Every single country of the world must have a health system which is as good as the standard used to be in the United States with the Hill-Bretton standard, or as the health systems of Germany and France were before the privatization of the health sector began in the 70s. Naturally, you need a crash program, temporary hospitals, the kinds of measures which were done in Hubei province and Wuhan. But then naturally, you have to turn that into permanent health facilities. And for that, you need infrastructure. You can't put a hospital in the middle of the desert. You have to earnestly start to overcome the underdevelopment of the developing countries. Now, there is a program which can be the blueprint to start this kind of infrastructure global development tomorrow if the political will can be mobilized. And that is the program which we published in 2014 called The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge. This was our answer to President Xi Jinping putting the New Silk Road on the agenda. And this was a program we have worked on literally since more than 40 years. It contains a concrete development plan for Africa, which we published in 1976. It contains a program for the integration of Latin America, for the development of South Asia, the Pacific Basin, the Eurasian Land Bridge, the Oasis Plan for the Middle East, and many aspects more. So we have a blueprint to completely start the development of the planet immediately. As a first step, you need to implement a new Bretton Woods system to replace the casino economy, which is bankrupt and which is only kept alive by insane amounts of liquidity pumped by the central banks, which will lead in the short term to a hyperinflationary blowout of the entire system. And we have to go back to the idea of Bretton Woods as Franklin D. Roosevelt intended it, namely that the main aim would have been to overcome poverty in the developing countries by providing long-term low-interest credit lines for a real industrialization of the developing countries. As this program was never implemented because of the untimely death of Roosevelt and the fact that Churchill and Truman organized much of the environment of the actual Bretton Woods, which was then implemented despite some useful features it had. Now, obviously, Roosevelt's idea that the need to overcome poverty and increase the living standard of the entire world population as the precondition for a durable peace and stability is absolutely valid today. We also need to combine that, and the four powers must combine that with the implementation of the four laws of Lyndon LaRouche. First, you need a global Glass-Steagall separation of the banks. The commercial banks must be protected. The casino part of the finance system has to be basically ended. Then you need a national bank in the tradition of Alexander Hamilton in every country for credit generation, and you need to combine these national banks internationally into a new Bretton Woods system, which then provides these credit lines for large development projects. Then the fourth law of Lyndon LaRouche is even more important because it defines the basis for the implementation of the common aims of mankind. We need to increase the productivity of the entire world economy because as the present coincidence of crises, of the pandemic, the famine, the collapse of the real economy demonstrate the present industrial capacities of the entire world economy are not sufficient to provide for the livelihood of the existing population of more than 7 billion people today. So we need a crash program for the implementation of the commercial use of fusion power, which is largely a question of international cooperation and large funding. We need to invest in biophysics to find the causes of the coronavirus and many other potential viruses which could come easily after this pandemic. There is no guarantee that not an even more horrible virus would follow immediately afterwards. And we have to understand the issues of life, the issues of the laws of the universe better in order to combat these kinds of threats. And naturally, we need international space cooperation, which is the way to the future and the more adult cooperation of the human civilization. So there are very concrete steps. They may sound impossible and utopian, but the big question is mankind fit to survive? Can we create a basis, an order of international relations among nations which guarantees the durable survivability of the human species? And I would like to have that question answered in a positive way. So if we think about the heroes of the world wars, especially World War II, and what it meant to defeat National Socialism, then if these lives were not sacrificed in vain, we better come back to the spirit of the Elbe and settle this question of cooperation among nations for good.
Thank you very much, Helga. We're now going to hear from His Excellency Mr. Dmitry Polyansky, the first Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of the Russian Federation to the United Nations. He prepared a message for today's commemoration.
Dear colleagues, dear participants in Schiller Institute conference on the great victory in the Second World War, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to address your event, which happens in a very sacred day for us. It happens on the day of the victory over fascism that my country, at that time the Soviet Union, made the most valuable contribution to. This day is very much enshrined in the memory of our people, because everybody in my country has some relatives who either perished in this terrible war or participated and was maimed or was working in the rear economy of our country to help to boost military production and to change the course of war. As you know, we were not provoking this war, we were not expecting it, and this happened as a big problem for my country and for the whole of the mankind. 27 million of my compatriots perished, mostly civil population. There were immense atrocities committed. Of course, one needs to remember Holocaust. And these things should never happen again. We all understand this. Unfortunately, after the beginning of the 90s, there are trends which are very worrying, when there are countries that try to rewrite the history of the Second World War, sometimes to change places between the victors and those who were criminals during this war. And we in Russia and in some neighboring states are doing our best not to allow such interpretation of history, which absolutely turns the whole course of the Second World War upside down. We are very much worried by these trends in some of our neighboring states, when there are Nazi collaborators who are now being respected as heroes, and when the monuments to the real heroes, to the real liberators, are being demolished or placed in other locations without addressing us and without speaking to their relatives. We think that this is not normal. We think that one should avoid such actions which really are not tolerable in our world. We need to respect the memory of those who fell victims of this war, and we need to be very accurate in describing the events of this war. That's why the conferences like yours are very important. They mobilize opinion, they raise the awareness of specialists and of experts on the situation around the history of the Second World War, and they help people to understand better the sentiments and the moods in different countries of the world, including my country. I wish all of you success in this endeavor, and you can always count on Russia in defending the heritage of the Second World War and in honoring the victors and on providing accountability for the perpetrators of terrible crimes during this war. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Polyansky. We're now going to hear from Jim Jatras, former U.S. diplomat. He's spoken at other of our events, and we're happy to have him here again today. Jim?
Well, thank you so much. And I want to express my appreciation to Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche and to the Schiller Institute for inviting me to speak in this very distinguished company. I've just been pondering the contrast and the complementarity between the clip from Mr. Lyndon LaRouche of several years ago talking about the need for optimism, and then juxtaposing that to not necessarily pessimism, but the experience we all have that hopes for a more constructive future, for a more cooperative future, on so many occasions have been dashed. Certainly that was the case at the end of World War II, that we had maybe what was the spirit of the Elbe, but which was not borne out for reasons that we all understand. We had another chance of that perhaps in 1991 when communism ended, and it was possible perhaps to say, fine, that wreck from the 20th century we can now put behind us. Let's try to move forward on a more cooperative and constructive basis. That unfortunately did not happen either. That what we saw instead from, and I, as an American, I'm sorry to say this, working at the State Department at the time and later at the U.S. Senate, watching the apparatus of power in Washington look at the change in the global situation as simply an opportunity for us to claim, in the name of American leadership, global domination, as two ideologists of neoconservatism put it, benevolent global hegemony, and that 30 years have passed in essentially a wasted opportunity and making what should have been a positive path forward for humanity one that now threatens its very existence. One looks back, for example, that during the time of the first Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, there was, at least I think on both sides, a very serious appreciation that if something were to go wrong and if a war were to take place, that could very well be the end of humanity, and that safeguards had to be put in place to make sure that would happen. Instead, what we've seen now, as we have embarked on what many people are calling a second Cold War with Russia, that those safeguards are systematically being dismantled. That there's almost a sense of a reckless glee on the part of some elements of the American establishment that we can poke the Russians, we can poke the Chinese, we can poke the Iranians or the Venezuelans or the North Koreans and whoever it is. And what are they going to do about it because we're so big and powerful? That's not a good way to behave. That's likely to result in something unexpected and devastating that nobody really wanted, nobody really expected. So I think we find ourselves at a crossroads between, on the one hand, wanting to have that realistic optimism that Mr. Larouche spoke of, that as human beings, we always have a potential, that with God's help, there is always something good that could happen if we go about it intelligently and realistically. On the other hand, to have no illusions about what the dangers are and how other actors will double down on the mistakes that have been made in the past. Now, this brings us, unfortunately, to the question of American politics that, and I think everybody in this discussion would agree that we need to have the big four countries. A few years ago, some of us were calling for a meeting of the big three, Trump, Putin, and Xi, and I certainly think Prime Minister Modi should be included in that company, that we need to have the primary responsible countries in the world come to a common agreement. It's correct what Helga Zepp-LaRouche said, that the G7 is not going to do it, the G20 is not going to do it, that it has to be, so to speak, the big boys who can come to a meeting of the minds. And I would say, in a certain sense, similar to what we saw with the concert of Europe in the 19th century, to make sure that the rules of the road are understood, that we have an understanding of not stepping on the other power's toes in areas that are vital to their national interest, but of course negligible to ours. The problem is, unfortunately, again, what goes on in Washington. I think the juxtaposition that Helga made between President Trump's statement about the meeting on the Elbe versus the statement from Secretary of State Pompeo illustrates this almost schizophrenia you find in the American administration, which, as far as many of us can tell, basically pits President Trump against everybody else in his administration. That if there's anybody in his administration who would like to go down that path of responsible meeting of the minds with the other principal world leaders, it will be President Trump. But then you're very hard pressed to say, and who in his administration actually agrees with him about that? Certainly not Mr. Pompeo, not Mr. Esper over at the Pentagon, not Mr. O'Brien at the NSC, that for reasons that I'm not going to speculate on, he has managed to assemble an administration composed of people that all want to double down on the same errors that have been made in the last few decades. Now, can he break free of that? This has been the big unponderable question that has faced us for the last 3 years as the Russia hysteria has been ginned up. And now we're seeing now in the context of the coronavirus, a China hysteria being ginned up. So the short-term prospects of a light bulb going on in Washington, President Trump finally saying, I now have the power and the determination to go do this, and this that needs to be done. Again, one wants to be optimism, but you try to see the path of how that can take place, how those ideas not only can stir a response in the president's mind, to which I think he would be receptive, but he actually then is capable of carrying out, given all of the bureaucratic resistance to him. Now, with regard to the not only the epidemiological but the economic and financial wreckage that's being caused in the wake of this virus, maybe as in other crisis situations, this also gives us grounds for some optimism. We see a lot of people at the grassroots level beginning to rebel against what they're being told they must do in terms of lockdown. And in many cases, we know many of these edicts are quite arbitrary and nonsensical in terms of what people are being told to do. And I think a lot of people are expressing their opposition to that. We are seeing, I think, and I think Helga is right about this widespread threat of a breakdown in our infrastructure, a breakdown in the food supply system that is even going to hit a country like the United States, much less what it's going to do elsewhere in the world. To give you a case in point, we're now looking at the possibility of meat shortages in American supermarkets, a large part of this being caused by the fact that only certain processors are allowed to sell to certain customers under federal law, and it's not even possible so far to change those regulations so that other suppliers can actually get that food from the farmers to the people who need it. The question is can this crisis result in some shift away from the domination of an establishment that has essentially run this country into the ground and is facing the world with a new world war and perhaps a final world war? This is what we do not know. So I think what we all need to, I think, focus on is that there is a path forward. It's a positive path forward. We all know what the contours are. They've been very clearly set out by people like Helga Zepp-LaRouche and the Schiller Institute, and of course by the late Lyndon LaRouche. The question is can the dislocations that are caused by the current crisis result in an opportunity for American policymakers, and above all, President Trump, to finally say we need to break free of these shackles that have doomed the policies of the past, and to do what needs to be done that should be evident to everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to now go to Jacques Cheminade. Now, Jacques spoke 2 weeks ago at our conference, Mankind's Existence Now Depends on the Establishment of a New Paradigm. As a former presidential candidate in France, he understands something about showing leadership in the most adverse of circumstances, just as Charles de Gaulle had to do that in World War II. He's also an expert in the French ideology, and as such, he knows how to avoid existentialist reactions to crisis. Jacques has two patron saints. One of them is Jeanne d'Arc, and the other is Francois Rabelais, who he sometimes invokes to get his countrymen to laugh and the rest of us to think. So, Jacques, from you.
I greet all of you with great hope. I have something to add to our reflections, to throw some prejudices overboard, and raise the issue of our community of principle to define our future beyond and above the issue in itself. The defeat of Nazism and fascism can never be forgotten. And the followers of those who then were united to fight against them should now, today, raise their conscience at the level, the political conscience, at the level which allowed our victory. That is why I find essential for the understanding of our common past and, moreover, the accomplishment of our future, to raise the often or the too often misunderstood question of the relations of the Free French and the then American administration, of Charles de Gaulle and Franklin Delano Roosevelt during World War II. I wrote a piece on that issue, de Gaulle, Roosevelt, and our common safety on behalf of our common future. And Lyndon Larouche wrote with me, he wrote most of it, but we have many discussions about it, a book called France After de Gaulle. There is a dark legend about the relations between Roosevelt and de Gaulle, and we should dissipate the unnecessary clouds and evil clouds of that legend. The legend says that Roosevelt and de Gaulle utterly disliked each other, even to the level to consider themselves as enemies. Many Americans say that Roosevelt considered de Gaulle as an anti-American proto-fascist, and many French pretend that Roosevelt was an American imperialist that wanted to take over the world. It is essential today to raise above such vulgar, petty, and subordinate quarrels. Both de Gaulle and Roosevelt not only fought together for the same cause, but both overcame the prejudices and stereotypes of their times and their social environment. True, they dissented on many issues during the war. I will mention two and show that both were solved at a higher level. First, when Roosevelt and Churchill decided to meet in what at the time was French Morocco at Casablanca on January 1943, de Gaulle was furious because the decision was made without asking France first. He nonetheless agreed to go to Casablanca and met Roosevelt. After that meeting, Roosevelt said that de Gaulle was maybe an unbearable fellow, but he was a much better patriot than all Frenchmen of those times. Second, when the American GIs disembarked in France, de Gaulle was again furious. He was often furious because he had not been informed before, and he flipped because the American administration had printed Allied military government of occupied territories, the AMGOT, currency, as if France had not had an established government, his government, thought de Gaulle, the Free French government. The issue was solved when Roosevelt and Eisenhower allowed the de Gaulle forces, the Free French forces, to enter into Paris before everybody else on August 1944. Most of the discrepancies between de Gaulle and Roosevelt were solved because they pushed aside those discrepancies, both of them. De Gaulle understood that a certain French-American team tried to prevent or sabotage the possibility of a meeting between President Roosevelt and himself. Roosevelt understood that his services, mainly at the time in the State Department, or people like Robert Murphy in Algiers, and mainly, of course, Winston Churchill himself, wanted to antagonize him against de Gaulle. He understood that the American people considered that instead de Gaulle was a true representative of the French nation. De Gaulle, who met Roosevelt 3 times between July 6 and July 9, 1944, and he said that both represented the interests of their respective nations, but had no hostile feelings against each other, and on the contrary, a commitment to common values. After Roosevelt's death, de Gaulle stressed if he had lived longer once the war had been won, we would certainly have time for a long dialogue. And I'm sure that we would have understood and appreciated the reasons which guided our actions at the head of France and at the head of the United States. Then de Gaulle also was politically eliminated. They had to put aside Roosevelt died, and to put aside de Gaulle, de Gaulle was politically eliminated. On July 1955, de Gaulle told Douglas Dillon, the American ambassador in Paris, "I always remember my difficulties with President Roosevelt. And retrospectively, I consider that we were both right." And he later added, "If he, Roosevelt, had lived longer, world history would have been so different." De Gaulle always kept an autographed, a signed picture of Roosevelt over his desk in his house at La Boisserie. At least 4 lessons have to be learned for today from those decisive moments. First, always defend the cause of your nation, whatever your personal feelings or temporary inclinations about persons, not as a thing in itself, but as a commitment to a better, more human future for the whole humanity. Second, never trust the services trying to flatter or confuse you. Roosevelt was right to fear the amateurism and unreliability, they were unreliable, of the French services, heavily under British influence. De Gaulle feared them as well. Roosevelt despised the intrigues around him and the inclinations of the State Department bureaucracy. De Gaulle too. The worst enemies are sometimes inside your own government, as was said before. The later assassination attempts against de Gaulle are a proof of it in the 1960s. 3. Never fight and never forget that your mission is to win. Never forget that your mission is to win. For the cause of your nation, the world, and humanity, human creativity. Never identify yourself with a defeat, even if you appear to most stubborn as a mule. Keep going. Why is it so important today? Because de Gaulle and Roosevelt have something very deep in common. They were guided by their mission, both, against all odds, and were not, like today's politicians, animal circus. And because from both, we should learn to put parochial, petty issues aside and go for the best of us, for the advantage of the other, and more profoundly today, for the coincidentia oppositorum, as Nicolas de Cusa and Helga Larouche very often tell us, the overcoming at a higher level of the apparent geopolitical confrontations, which is the very condition to overcome at a higher level, the very condition for creative policies. 4. Never trust those that want to divide us from our mission. Divide to rule. What Churchill always tried to do. Sometimes, unfortunately, with a perverse gift for doing bad things. Let's always look above the meanness of the British Empire. It's a trap, and it's the last trap we should get rid of. Remember what Churchill said about World War II. He was asked what was your worst moment, and he answered, the heaviest cross that I had them to carry was de Gaulle's cross of Lorraine. To win our future, we have to look at it as if we were in the future, inspired by those in our past that created a future for us. This is what Roosevelt did in 1933 with the Glass-Steagall Act, and de Gaulle as well did in 1945. He did the same. This is what Kennedy did, then strongly supported by de Gaulle, in the Cuban Missile Crisis. De Gaulle was the first to support Kennedy at that moment. Never think that Roosevelt was anti-French or de Gaulle anti-American. We owe to our sons and grandsons to be inspired by both of them and by their fighting spirit, which was common, in the 75th anniversary of May 8 or May 9. Because it is today our very future is at stake, like never before. And as Lyndon LaRouche understood, we are facing our tragic fate. Let's make of this tragedy an opportunity. In his June 18 call of 1940, his famous call of 1940, from London, de Gaulle said to those who were desperate because of the French defeat, he said, "Stop it. This is not an European conflict. It is an international war of civilizations. The industrial power of the United States has not yet been thrown in the battlefield. We are destined, we are doomed to overcome. Help me, help me." I had to say this on this May 9th because we need to muster our best sources of inspiration to stand up and fight. Now, with the friendly, demanding, inextinguishable, and exemplary contributions of Lyndon LaRouche's writings and life, with his profound ideas and his deep emotional commitment, we have that in our hands to create, I would say, a universal melting pot where all will be physically and mentally fed. That is our challenge on this May 9th.
Thank you, Jacques. We're now going to play two messages prepared for today whose relationship we think you will understand immediately. The first will be from William Binney, former technical director of the National Security Agency, immediately followed by His Excellency Ambassador Igor Kobayev, Ambassador of the Russian Federation to the Philippines.
Well, as a part of the 75th anniversary of VE Day, it reminds me of my father and my father-in-law. They both fought in France. My father under Omar Bradley, and my father-in-law under Patton in the Third Army. So my family has, and I of course was in the Army too, from 1965 to 1969. So it does give me that sense of patriotism and remembrance of what people sacrificed for this country in terms of protecting freedom as they knew it back then. I mean, we at the current time are in danger of losing those freedoms based on preconceived ideas and agendas being pushed around by the general mainstream media and various elements in our government. And so the basic case is in, for example, the Russiagate issue. When they start, and they're still pushing the Russiagate, the Russians did it, you know, they hacked the DNC. Well, they didn't provide anything to WikiLeaks, but all that data was hand carried to them. And it was evidence from the metadata and the forensics that we could prove all of that data was physically transferred to WikiLeaks. And the other thing was Goose for Two. And Goose for Two came out shortly after, in 15th of June, I believe it was, of 2016. And when he did that, he produced items that had Russian fingerprints in them. But when you went to the WikiLeaks publication of Podesta emails, you found some of the same ones there, and they didn't have those fingerprints. Well, that gets back to the compromise of the CIA Vault 7 material by WikiLeaks, which showed that they used a program called Marble Framework one time in 2016. This program, when they used it, they could hack into sites and make it look like somebody else did it. Well, who were the options that were available already in that framework program? They could make it look like the Russians did it, the Chinese, North Koreans, Iranians, or Arab countries. So this all says that that was all put in there. Gooser 2 was a fabrication by CIA and elements within CIA. So this is not, we're all being manipulated here. As my work with the National Security Agency, my primary job was to monitor and follow the Russians, the Soviet Union, and the Warsaw Pact. And so I did that for any number of years, almost 30 years. And in there, I was able to see and understand in advance what they were planning on doing without actually reading their material. But I could predict things like the invasion of Czechoslovakia, the invasion of Afghanistan, military moves in any direction. So that I'm quite familiar with Russian activities, and it's easy for me to understand what they're doing and how they do it, and the fingerprints that they evidence when they're planning and actually executing things. So. Yeah. Okay. So with regard to Russiagate and what's happening now, there are certain orders in existence right now and have been existing in the United States government governing classification and use of that classification. That is that you cannot cover up criminal activity using classification. It's illegal. And that's based on Executive Order 13526, Section 1.7. That is the governing order for all classification of the United States government. And it says very simply, you cannot classify, maintain, classify, or not declassify any evidence of a crime, corruption, fraud, waste, abuse, and other types of criminal activity. So under those orders, and those are the orders that govern U.S. The administration's classification of all departments. So under that order in that section, you have to declassify any evidence of crimes, and that's what's been going on. The U.S. government's been trying to hide behind crimes. In the Third Circuit case, when we are suing them for violating the constitutional rights of every U.S. citizen, they're trying to cover it up by hiding behind classification. And so this is the whole point. None of this, and this is what Barr should use as his guide to what should be declassified. That would mean that all of this Russiagate shenanigans from the FBI, the DOJ, the Democrats, all of that would all come out in the wash as unclassified and be exposed to the public. And that's the guide he should use to do that. I'd like to thank the Schiller Institute for holding this conference and also trying to bring people together from around the world. And I'd like to also make sure that they understand that these laws exist in the United States to keep these kinds of activities, criminal activity and just agendas by secret groups of people trying to keep us apart in the world instead of allowing us to come together. And they should realize and hopefully help us put pressure of the governments to start doing the right thing here and stop trying to keep people as in separate groups and treat them like they're adversaries. Let's get together and hopefully be able to solve these problems worldwide.
So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share some considerations with you. So I think it's quite important and really symbolic in the eve of the celebration of the 75th anniversary of our common victory over Nazism in 1945. So it's a good occasion for me as a diplomat to recall that the allies referred to themselves as the United Nations in 1945. Awareness of common enemy in the face of the inhuman ideology of Nazism helped the states, the countries with different political, social, and economic models to put their disputes aside, to overcome their differences, and finally, to find a common ground and to combine efforts in their struggle against common enemy. So the belief that the defeat of Nazi Germany and its satellites in both Europe and Asia will mark their triumph of justice and the victory of light over darkness was a unique unifying factor. So now I'm convinced that it's high time to learn some lessons of history. It's really relevant today when all of us have to face another common enemy, coronavirus pandemic. So we need to learn lessons of history because it's high time to combine our efforts. Instead of drawing new dividing lines in the world, looking for new enemies, and playing other short-sighted political games. It's obvious for all reasonable, shrewd people that no country, small or big, it doesn't matter, is not able to efficiently cope with this new global threat on its own. So we need to be together. We need to combine, to join our efforts, because each and every nation can and should make its indispensable contribution to this joint struggle. That's my short message. I believe also that, like about 80 years ago, the great leaders of the then Soviet Union, the United States of America, and the United Kingdom proved able to put the differences among them aside and to combine the efforts against our common enemy. So this will be a good example for all responsible statements, all responsible politicians, and for all nations in order to save the mankind now in our joint struggle against common enemy, the coronavirus. I think that learning of lessons of history unfortunately dragged on, but late is better than never. So it's time to get rid of outdated cliches, all kinds of obsessions. It's not time to create new enemies, especially the imaginary ones. It's high time to be together and to fight shoulder to shoulder against common enemy. Thank you so much.
Diane Sayre, the founder of the New York City Schiller Institute Chorus, has some remarks now, and she's also got, I think, a few statements we're going to be hearing, and we'll be going right from there to reactions from the panel, and then questions and answers. So, Diane?
Great. Thank you very much. What I was thinking about on this anniversary of VE Day is the remarks made by General Douglas MacArthur on VJ Day, September 2nd, 1945, on the deck of the battleship Missouri, about the question of what had become very clear to him after the nuclear bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is that once the human species has the capability of completely annihilating itself, then you have to find another way to resolve conflicts and disagreements than war. And he said that it requires a recrudescence of the spirit if we are to save the flesh. And we had a little exchange of the chorus, which was really very moving. The chorus, the Schiller Institute NYC chorus, had been requested to prepare a Russian military song in preparation for the VE Day celebrations, and Russian choruses were singing American military songs and Australian military songs and so on. And then COVID hit, and we could not rehearse together, but we did make a virtual chorus of a song called Tri Tankista, about three merry tankmen who repelled the Japanese invasion of Mongolia, actually, but it is a very, very popular song in Russia. And this has been put up in Russia, and I'm just going to share a few of the comments, forgive me for the Google Translate from Russian to English, but I think you will see the spirit that actually exists, which is the cause for optimism in the face of this danger. One person writes, "Thank you from the bottom of my heart, waves, goosebumps, to tears. Yes, the peoples of all countries, of all faiths, would have lived peacefully and amicably for a long time, like good neighbors, but the rulers, leaders among themselves, share something, forcing their people to fight with others." Someone writes, "Maybe the virus was needed just to show what we are all alike and how we all have one goal, to protect the weak in any country." Another person writes, "My cousin Fedya burned 3 times in a tank, and a funeral came to him 2 times, but he lived. He was the only one of the 4 sons of my great-grandfather to return home. He listened to the song and cried." Look at this. Americans with a St. George ribbon on their chest, the symbol of the fight against fascism. The New York Times and the Washington Post must be fuming. Russia and America can, but are not allowed to work together. Thank you for this. I am in shock, a lump in the throat. I listened 5 times, and so from this performance I feel uneasy for the soul and for what it takes. Thanks, guys. We must be friends. Tears are pouring. I remembered how American soldiers saved my uncle from the concentration camp. So imagine 1,500 comments like this directly from the Russian people who were touched by our gesture to remember this day. And I think that gets at a certain quality of response we have to have, and also what you saw with MacArthur's own actions in the military occupation of Japan, because he was personally gut-wrenched, saying that he knew throughout history, he never knew of an occupation that had been successful. Either people were too harsh, provoking a revolt, or too soft, how to do it. And he, because of his love for the people of Japan, because of that quality of spirituality, was able to preside over the rebuilding of Japan in a way that preserved the dignity and the best of Japanese culture, but with the defeat of the fascist militaristic aspects. So I think this is very important for what he said. Now, let me get to the comments from former state senator Richard Black of Virginia, and I'm reading in part. Today marks the end of World War II in the European theater. That tragic struggle ended 60 million lives. At this historic juncture, some may feel triumphant, but I do not. I honor the sacrifices of those who perished, but because I have bled in battle, I do not celebrate war's glory, but only its end. Though Americans overwhelmingly oppose the war in Afghanistan, we still remain there after 20 years, and there is no likely end in sight. The war on terror has been our excuse for supporting al-Qaeda in Syria for the past 9 years. We imposed cruel sanctions on Syria, deliberately undermining its ability to fight the unspeakable horrors of terrorism. Today, few Americans realize that we are allied against Syria with the very forces that sparked the war on terror by attacking the Pentagon and Twin Towers on 9/11. Along with France and Britain, we pulverized Libya without justification in 2011. The great powers plundered its treasury and looted its arsenals. We turned Africa's most prosperous nation into a chaotic killing ground, destroying the foundations of civilization in that country. And he says, again, reiterating what both Mr. Jatras and Helga Zepp-LaRouche have said in different ways, neither the president nor the American people are able to stop these wars. When President Trump attempted to withdraw from Syria, the Pentagon was defiant, and Washington doubled down on impeachment. Now we are moving to expand the war in the Middle East by attacking Iran, and war with Iran is no more justified than war with Iraq. The news media incessantly agitate for new military ventures. The widening provocations along the Russian borders were only interrupted by the latest craze directed at China. Yet war against Russia or China would involve nuclear weapons, risking death tolls that would dwarf those of World War II. I reject the hostility directed at China and the absurd conspiracies blaming it for the coronavirus. Such diseases are nothing new. They may never be eradicated and simply remain a part of the human condition. We can cooperate to control them as best we can, but nothing can be gained by pointing fingers at others as they face the epidemic themselves. We do have issues with China over trade. We can negotiate those issues and resolve them. But in an age of nuclear competitors, we have no rational alternative to competing peacefully without incinerating mankind. Richard H. Black, former Senator of Virginia.
Okay, thank you, Diane. What I want to do now is to go to the entire panoply of speakers and ask if there's anything that any of you would like to comment on that you've heard, either that any of you have said or any of the offered statements represented. And then we'll go into questions. We have other statements, other matters. But I want to first turn to Helga and just ask if there's anything that you have to say, given everything that's been said so far.
Well, I just think we have to double our and quadruple and tenfold our efforts, because I think we are in a countdown. I think that the decision where civilization will go will come soon. You know, because if you rethink and restudy the history of world wars, which I just did, you know, I was looking at the various theaters, and it was an enormous process. And I can only encourage people to look at that, because, you know, the enormity of the destruction was just unbelievable. And if ever would be nuclear weapons used, I'm pretty sure that, you know, I read articles by such experts like Ted Postol and Christiansen, and they all make an argument that once you use one nuclear weapon, it is the difference between conventional war and nuclear war that all weapons eventually will be used. And that is in all likelihood going to be the end of civilization. So the stake is bigger than at any time before. And if you look at the history of the previous world wars, you can actually always determine that there was a point after which it was too late to stop it. Concerning the First World War, people are saying that, you know, everybody was sleepwalking into it and nobody expected it to go how it went, which is true. But nevertheless, there was a point where the dynamic had become automatic. The same goes for World War II. And now that we are in front of World War III, potentially, you know, I'm very concerned that this idea of blaming China for either biological warfare or having, you know, sent infected patients around the world to weaken the West, or having, you know, not told the world about the seriousness of the crisis, which is all proven to be wrong, but that the building of an enemy image of such dimensions, you know, I mean, if you blame a superpower, blames one other people in the superpower blame another superpower of having done such an enormous damage, you are building an enemy image for war. And I think people really have to wake up to that and understand that, that we can absolutely not have war anymore as a means of conflict resolution, because if it comes to it, and all the experts make the point that even in the Cold War, the structure of communication between the Soviet Union and the West, and especially the United States, was much better than now, where these lines of communication are much more questionable, and many structures have been taken down. So I would really, say that everybody who agrees with our analysis, or at least a good portion of it, should help to, make sure that this crisis can be really turned around, and that out of this corona crisis, which, cannot be solved by one country. I agree with the ambassador of Russia from the Philippines, that we really use that as a chance to change completely into the new paradigm, and that we end this chapter of history of wars.
Jim, is anything that you, on the entirety of what's been heard so far, have to say? Any comments?
Yes. In the question of whether or not, and as I say, this is, I think, very largely an American problem, whether or not the United States can change course to take a positive approach, especially toward Russia and China, also to India, or whether we will go for broke, whether we will do something really dangerous and really stupid to try to hold on to our diminishing ability to project power and the project for global domination. I was struck by the example of General de Gaulle, that ultimately the mark of decency, the mark of a patriot, is to know when to say no. And I think General de Gaulle was able to do that, especially as he regarded the Anglo-Americans as not necessarily having France's best interests at heart. And this makes me wonder especially about what are the prospects in Europe today. I think, unfortunately, a lot of Europeans have a very poor perception of American politics. They think, oh, Trump is a crazy man. Trump is a crazy man. He's the one causing all these problems, just like many of them had that idea about Reagan, for example. But in fact, that what is really causing the problems isn't Trump the crazy man. Rather, it's what they call the adults in the room. It's the establishment voices that keep trying to drag him back to the failed policies of the past. Oh, Mr. President, you can't pull out of Syria. That would not work out well for us. Mr. President, you can't pull out of Afghanistan. You can't do that. We keep trying to provoke the Chinese in the South China Sea, who are trying to shut down Huawei, who are trying to scuttle the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, playing all of their little games here. And I wonder at what point the people, let's face it, if there is a war, if it was obviously a war between the Americans and the Chinese, or the Americans and the Russians, or perhaps both, you can bet it will be a total disaster for the Europeans. I mean, they will be a battleground in any such struggle, and probably will be more devastated. There's any more or less in such a terrible outcome. At what point do their instincts for survival begin to kick in, and they start saying to Washington, ohne uns, not with us, that they will not go along with these adventures from Washington, that they will stop being good little satellites when it comes to confronting the Russians, or for that matter, the Chinese. I'm also thinking about I think much has been said about the very negative role that Great Britain has played because of its special relationship with the United States. I also think about the influence you see here in Washington quite a bit of the so-called Three Seas Initiative, which is essentially a Polish and Baltic project to create a cordon sanitaire in Eastern Europe to permanently exclude Russia from continental affairs. That I do have to ask the question, and maybe Helga can address this, is especially in Germany, but also in other European countries, at what point does the light bulb go on and they say, this is a matter of survival for us, not to go along with the failed policies from Washington, to look out for our own interests and to become a catalyst for the necessary dialogue, rather than simply joining with the Washington establishment and being an obstacle.
Helga, you want to respond to that now?
I think there are baby steps where the German government is not going along. For example, I think on the recent question of blaming China, I think the German government and the BND, for that matter, said that they don't see any evidence of this as such. But I'm not so sure, because this established. I mean, take for example the present president of the EU Commission, the former defense minister Ursula von der Leyen, Merkel. These people, unfortunately, if they become anti-American for those reasons you mentioned, they tend to go to the British, and then you come into an even worse kind of thing. I think the best scenario would really be that the EU Commission, the EU structure breaks apart, and a new alignment takes place, which right now you have the potential. I mean, this decision by the Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe opposing the buying of corporate bonds and other debt through the EZB as being partially unconstitutional. This is a real break, because they say that the EU Commission, the EZB, has not the right to do that, and that it is the task of the German government and the German parliament to evaluate these programs ahead of time of side effects, because they have the effect of devaluing the savings of the people, devaluing investments. And there was a huge freak out. I mean, you had a meeting in the Bundestag where Lagarde spoke, and she was arrogant. She said EU law is above German law, and we feel not obliged to respond to this at all. But if you look at the commentaries, also from Schäuble and others, they clearly realize that now, on the basis of this, not only all present programs like this 750 billion bailout program, which they are pushing now because of the virus, but also every constitutional court of every other European Union member can do the same thing. And the erosion of this EU is really very far gone. And I think the best thing would be that it really stops, and that there is a new alliance of countries, like, for example, the Europe of the fatherlands de Gaulle was talking about, which I think, you can have a European unity of sovereign nation states. You don't need this supranational structure which suffocates every single member. And the Eurozone was from the beginning, it was politically motivated to keep Germany down after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And, it could not function. And Attali said as much. He said, we built this whole construct with a flaw, so that eventually any crisis would force an even greater unification of Europe, which obviously will not happen, because right now you have all these centrifugal tendencies because of the austerity towards the south, because of the refugee crisis. So the best thing which could happen is that if this construct breaks apart, either you have a Europe of the fatherland, or, and I find this still a very interesting idea, Putin a couple of months ago said that there is absolutely the option to create a Europe from the Pacific, from the Vladivostok to Lisbon, and that it may not look likely right now, but crisis points could erupt where all of a sudden such an alternative is the only existing alternative in town, and that it can be realized. I think that would be much better, because anything which stops this geopolitical confrontation against Russia and China is an absolutely necessary thing. And I think everybody who is in their right mind does not want that to be anti-American, because everybody knows that America has to be part of the solution, or else it does not work. So I think the best thing would be that the EU really disintegrates, because that is the apparatus which is, and several British articles said it quite openly some years ago, that this present EU is just the regional implementation of the British policy, and that should really be reversed.
Jacques, your thoughts?
We are in the middle of the tragedy of our lives and the tragedy of modern history, of our history, a part of world history. And confronted to that, we should know that we were warned by Lyndon Larouche of what was going to happen if what he proposed and what he tries to inspire the world leaders with was not realized, and it was not done. So the tragedy is due to what was not done. And today, for each of us, we cannot remain spectators or commentators. We would lose our portion of humanity if we do it. We have to be actors, we have to be people intervening in what we have to do. And Helga called for people to join the ferment and the dynamics of the Schiller Institute. So we have to intervene, but we have to intervene not as persons who go with what they think is true without thinking and confronting this to world history and what was done before, and to create a path towards a better world. And it's what I tried to do with de Gaulle and Roosevelt. If you looked at it, you see that beyond the relations between them two, there was a community of principle which went beyond that. And this is what Lynn, with the new Bretton Woods and all his 4 principles, is trying to inspire as a basis for this to succeed. And when I said Roosevelt died, de Gaulle was eliminated, and when he came back, he was weakened. So we have now an opportunity for us, given by the circumstance of history that we are confronted with. We have an opportunity to take the lead, to become pilots in this moment of history. And it's always a minority of people that manage to change the direction of society and the direction of history. And I think it's absolutely our moment, and we should see what happened during World War II as a theater. And in a theater, we should see what was not done and what happened after what was not done, and to have the commitment to jump on the theater and to say we should do what we have to do, and we are going to fight in the best way. So this has to be understood as a world issue. We like our nations. Our nations are principled. We have a history, we have a language, we have a commitment. But they only exist. And Roosevelt and de Gaulle said it during World War II. And it's even more true now. Larouche said it many times. They are committed to the fate of humanity. And this commitment to the fate of humanity would be expressed, and I answer to the question on Europe, by an intention of Europe to be, de Gaulle said, from the Atlantic to the Urals. I would say from the Atlantic to the Sea of China, Eurasia. And then to the West, from the Atlantic to the United States. And if Europe is not involved in that as a bridge for the world land bridge, Europe doesn't exist, European nations do not exist. Our commitment should be of what made our own history, this commitment to be part of a civilization of all humanity, and to share with all civilizations a principle for the future, what I called a universal melting pot.
Jacques, I'd like you to help me do something. We have a video recording from Mr. Quetier, the mayor of Saint-Mère-Église, for the conference. I'd like you to say something to people before we show this as to who he is and what this means.
Oh yes, Saint-Mère-Église is very important because it's there that American paratroopers jumped first when the disembarkment took place. And there was a big fight there. And it was really heavy, terrible. And even today, you have on top of the church the image, the form of an American soldier hung there, because one of these soldiers, when he fell from the sky, got on the top of the church and got hung there and had to wait. And at every moment, he feared to be shot at, but finally he wasn't. So you have even a glass window in the church representing this paratrooper. So you have this sense in Sainte-Mère-l'Église of a true French-American friendship, what I tried to discuss before, not with any pretense to be the first or so on and so forth, but real friendship. And the predecessor of the present mayor had a wife, and he was not there when there was a celebration in the American cemetery of Sainte-Mère-l'Église, because it's a cemetery in Sainte-Mère-l'Église where all the graves of the soldiers that had died were put together before being redistributed in other cemeteries. And there was a grave of Theodore Roosevelt, a son of the nephew of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So the woman, the mayor, the wife of the mayor, was given some flowers, and she went to put flowers on the grave. And this was a picture in Life magazine at the time. And this woman became a celebrity in the whole United States because she was a symbol of this commitment to fight together and to honor the dead in the name of freedom and civilization.
À nos amis américains, mesdames, messieurs, aujourd'hui, nous célébrons la fin de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale et surtout la victoire contre le nazisme. Tout cela se déroulera de façon presque confidentielle, puisque nous vivons une étrange période à cause de la pandémie mondiale. Cette célébration n'en a que plus d'importance. Il convient de nous souvenir du sacrifice de ces hommes venus nous libérer et libérer aussi le peuple allemand de cette sombre idéologie. La solidarité entre les peuples nous a permis de sortir de l'obscurité et d'envisager des lendemains meilleurs. Ne l'oublions pas, en ces moments où nous pourrions être tentés par le repli sur nous-mêmes. Dans la nuit du 5 au 6 juin 1944, dès 0h30, les premiers soldats sautaient sur Sainte-Mère-l'Église et entamaient cette longue marche pour libérer l'Europe. N'oublions pas les 13 700 soldats enterrés dans les 3 cimetières provisoires ouverts dès le 7 juin 1944 dans la commune. Le 7 juin 2019, nous avons inauguré un monument érigé pour rappeler cet épisode des cimetières provisoires. J'étais accompagné de Georges Ciampa, vétéran de la 607e compagnie d'intendance, dont la mission était de prendre en charge les soldats tués lors des combats et d'aménager des cimetières provisoires. Il avait alors 18 ans. Ce moment restera dans ma mémoire. Georges connaît le prix élevé de la liberté. Célébrons ce 8 mai et regardons devant nous les peuples solidaires sont porteurs d'espoir. Jean Quétier, maire de Sainte-Mère-l'Église.
We'll return to questions just after we have a reading of a statement. I think, Diane, you have something from a representative from NASA.
Yes. This is from Dr. Gary H. Kittmacher, Communications and Education Mission Manager of the ISS program. He writes, "People have dreamed of living off the Earth in space for centuries. Today, the International Space Station has had men and women living and working in orbit for 20 years. Hundreds of years ago, civilization's great achievements were the great cathedrals. They would take centuries to complete and required the work of the greatest organizers, artisans, architects, craftsmen, and laborers. Today, that life-affirming project is the International Space Station. It is the largest and most complex spacecraft ever placed in orbit. It's a laboratory, an observation post, and a test bed for future technologies that will one day take men and women to other worlds. It has required many of the nations of the world, not only the United States, but Canada, Japan, Russia, and the nations of Europe. It has been a home for hundreds of visitors from around the world. It has been the dream, occupation, vocation, and center of attention for tens of thousands of dreamers, planners, scientists, architects, and engineers over multiple generations. One day in the future, more men and women will probably live in and work in space than on Earth. Our work today will have been the critical factor in making that possible. The desire to explore, understand, live, and work in space has stirred hearts and minds. The International Space Station has happened because of human curiosity, science, technology, politics, and the cultural achievements of people from around the world. It advances the cause of peace and goodwill with countries that work together to form an integral partnership. It demonstrates what can be accomplished when different countries and different cultures work together for a common cause.
I want to go back to questions now. I realize, and I think I should make sure the audience realizes that we've got speakers on, of course, from Europe, and it's now 10:15 p.m. over there. I have a question, therefore, for the panel, and this way we can allow everyone to answer. This is from Minister Counselor Eshete Tilahun, the Permanent Mission of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia to the United Nations. And here is what it says. Thank you for organizing this interesting virtual seminar. I am not sure if the polarized world as we see it today, including the representation in this discussion, will help humanity to overcome challenges in the coming decades. The virus of geopolitics referred to by the discussants is mutuating to regions and subregions too, through the empowerment of the bigger powers, by investing in their agent middle powers in every region of the world. The media and civil societies, which were, quote, trusted as a balancing arm of the world order established by the winners of World War II, are weakening faster than expected. I therefore believe that the next stabilizing and harmonizing system, at least in the context of addressing challenges at the local and national levels, could start in regional mechanisms, regional organizations in the South, such as the African Union. For the panelists, what is the best starting point of this paradigm shift? How do you see the role of regional organizations? How do you evaluate the sentiment of profiteering in the spread globally of the COVID-19, and what is its implication for the developing world? So, I guess, Helga, would you like to start?
Yeah, I understand what what the questioner is referring to, and naturally that is the case. But I have a slightly different perspective, and that is that this crisis, in my view, will get really terrible. I think we will have a combination of, pandemic, famine, collapse of economy. I mean, really, we are going into an unbelievable crisis, and I think most people have really not yet woken up to it because they don't want they don't want to change their life. They don't want to change their habits. And I think this news we just got that there were in 33 cities around the world demonstrations of thousands of people protesting the lockdown. I think this is a very dangerous development because, if you break down all the rules now, the danger of the pandemic getting really out of control is very big. So all I'm saying is that I think we will go into moments which will be really, incredible. And in that situation, there must be already established a chorus of countries, of leaders, of institutions, of, all kinds of groups, of farmers, of young people, of students, demanding this solution from the top. I personally think that we are really at a point in history where you need to change the system as a whole. And I don't think that there are partial solutions possible. I'm not discouraging it at all if people on a regional basis get together and try to work for the best they can. But I think that if the problem is not solved to stop the geopolitics between the United States and Russia and China in particular, in that case, India is important, but it's not as crucial as these other three countries. If the geopolitics among these three cannot be overcome, the danger is that it gets out of control, because the blame game is very, very dangerous, because you create situations which cannot be reversed. Now, therefore, I think what is the best way is that people study these proposals, the four-power agreement, what is the top-down reorganization of the world system they have to require. And I think, what Russia and China are actually doing is not so far away from such a demand. And I think they would be very open to cooperate with the United States and other countries. It's not an exclusive idea. And if there is a chorus of countries from the non-aligned movement, from the G77, from the African Union, from the Global South in general, of the countries who are faced with this existential crisis, demanding, we want these four powers because they are the most powerful gremium in the world. If it doesn't come from them, where should it come from? And we demand that they take the action to fix the world. I think that this will have an impact. And if you generate a public debate and create such a cause, I think we can absolutely create the conditions where, under accelerated conditions of crisis, it can happen.
Mr. Jatras, I understand you've got to get going, and therefore I'll give you the benefit to say whatever you wished about this and also say goodbye to us since you've got to get going. Go ahead.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. I agree with Helga that we need a systemic change. That I think partial, slight improvements on an overall trajectory that is bringing us to the brink of a global conflict, one which will certainly be nuclear, is unlikely to work in a piecemeal fashion, especially since so much of what is happening is actually in the wrong direction rather than the right direction. I hope in some way that may not be apparent to us right now that this crisis creates such an opportunity that we get to the point where institutions, as they've carried on for the past few decades, just don't work anymore. That people stop following orders from the usual suspects because they have to, because they don't have to anymore, because that the established political and economic and financial power just don't have the ability to make people follow their edicts anymore. I don't know exactly how that will work. I believe that the next few months will be a period of both maximum danger and maximum opportunity to see if some new dynamic can enter into the international system based on the dysfunction of the institutions we have now. I think what Helga said, for example, about the European Union is spot on. I think if this crisis results in the European Union as we know it now breaking apart either entirely or being completely restructured into something that actually does represent the sovereign interests of the people of Europe. That could be a watershed in moving things in the right direction, especially if these countries stop being the compliant satellites for the Washington establishment and say, no, this is what we need. We need you and the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians to get together and come up with a more stable world order that avoids the danger that is facing all of us. But that, I don't know that that will happen by itself. I think it's going to happen, as we've said, more people talking about it, more advocacy, and at the same time, the dysfunction and the breakdown of the established structures that simply cannot work.
Thank you very much. Jacques?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for being with
Thank
us.
you. Thank you.
Few steps in the direction of what is needed. There is a UNCTAD declaration for debt cancellation, debt forgiveness. There is a prime minister of Ethiopia who also said the same. Even the president of France said that the African debt should be cancelled. But all this is meaningless as such because it may be useful as step, but it's meaningless because the whole system is destructive. You have this system of permanent issuance of fake money to feed the fake debt. So all this breaking at the same time the capacity to produce and the living standards of the people. And we have at the extreme in emergent countries, in countries of the South, a situation of hunger, denutrition, destruction, which is the worst that we could imagine in our worst nightmares. So it means that something more gathering more the intentions of all of us should be put together. José López Portillo failed in 1982 because other countries from Latin America did not support him. Thomas Sankara failed in Africa of Burkina Faso and was murdered because he was not supported. Today, I think we have an opportunity. And this opportunity is that countries like China and Russia, they understand that they cannot stay in the present type of system. We have in the United States the work that we are doing around the issue of the American presidency. And this issue of American presidency is key. And you may think that Trump is alone, surrounded by traitors, but in fact, he is not, because he has the intention of the American population, and that what has to be addressed. So our program for a world land bridge, put together by Lyndon LaRouche in Earth's next 50 years, for example, this program has been published now with the full economic works of LaRouche, and I think it's very interesting to look at it as I tried to look at the Roosevelt-de Gaulle connection, but at a higher level, to look at it at what is coming from him for our future. And then we could think of how something can be put together from top down as a new direction for the world and what we call the new paradigm, which in fact means that we change our way of thinking and we think about the advantage of the other. We think about what defines humanity and not what defines possessions, what defines the policy, the historical policy of the empires of Venice, Amsterdam, and now the British Empire, what defines instead republics, but true republics, committed to the general welfare, as we said in as you said in the United States, and the common good of the people. So we need to gather persons around that with a very with the issue of science and understand science as a need to, in the real world, to put these principles into action with all the discoveries of human beings, new universal principles developed and which will create a society of the future. And as we can be inspired by the best works in our culture and the best works in other cultures. And it's there that a land bridge between Asia and Europe, between Europe and the United States, and without forgetting other parts of the world, would be so important to define what has to be our change to make a future possible.
Okay. Diane?
Yes. On this question, I just wanted to appeal very strongly to Americans who may not fully understand that their fate and future is tied up in this fight. And I think there is a very important development, which is the move by the Attorney General to drop the case against General Michael Flynn, who was Donald Trump's first national security advisor and who was the first target of this Russiagate hoax, which is directed by the British exactly to sabotage the potential for the United States to get out of this kind of geopolitics, as the president has said repeatedly that he intends to do. And I think that if the United States goes the wrong way, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for a combination of other nations to successfully create the new paradigm. And that is why the battle here has been so intense, emphatically starting with the massive array of resources brought to bear in the silencing or attempted silencing of Lyndon LaRouche and the prevention of Lyndon LaRouche from becoming president of the United States. So I just want to say to Americans, there really is a choice before you right now, which is the United States going to be destroyed as a satrap of the British liberal imperial geopolitical system, as was expressed by our Secretary of State Pompeo in his VE Day greeting? Or will the United States finally liberate itself to be the nation as intended by the founding fathers, as you saw in Alexander Hamilton, John Quincy Adams, Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt's vision for the post-World War world, and emphatically LaRouche? And it's a moment where we absolutely cannot sit on the sidelines, and you see it with this shift in terrain, perhaps the beginning of the reversal of this Russiagate operation. But this is an extremely important battle which determines whether we can be successful in the other areas.
Okay. I just wanted to check something. I understand also, Jacques, you're going to have to be getting going pretty soon as well. So I want to make sure if that's the case, if you have something you'd like to say before that happens. We have many other questions, but most of them are probably, Helga can probably deal with them. So if there's anything you'd like to say at this point in the event that you have to get going, or what's your time like?
Follow what José López Portillo said. You should listen to the wise words of Lyndon LaRouche. And I think this is key today. It's not something abstract or it's something very real, and it should concern your personal life. It's not something for books or for audiences. It's something personal to each of us, and this should be should lead us into the action that is necessary. And in that sense, it will give us a confidence in ourselves. And instead of being frightened or being too selfish or being insecure, we should have the authority to intervene at the same time that we have the humility to respect ideas and humility to respect those who have created those ideas.
Thanks. Thank you, Jacques. Diane, I think you have the next question for Helga, right?
Yes. This is from Mr. Diego Barona, the first secretary of the Embassy of the Republic of Colombia in Canada. He writes, in a rapidly changing world, gradually evolving towards more global governance, what would you foresee as the basis for a new monetary world order? Will the transformation over the mid and long term be harmonized or be a disruptive shock? What will it be based upon? Arrangements among national currencies or something else? From Mr. Diego Barona.
Well, I think that naturally it can be disruptive. I mean, what is happening right now is the danger of a uncontrolled hyperinflationary collapse. But it can also be, that the many minefields of the system blow up. I mean, we are at the end of this present system. So what we are advocating is an orderly reorganization before such a thing happens. Now, if you would do that, you can create a credit system which basically would, basically increase the productive powers of the labor force of every country. It would, on the one side, gear up the production of capital goods in the industrialized countries for a massive technology and transfer of capital goods to the developing countries. And it would provide, large-scale infrastructure programs, industrial parks, and build up the developing countries in ways which should have been done, basically following the Second World War. So I think that can be a very stable agreement, and that is why we are proposing it to be really from the top down, and it will be voluntary. Countries who do not want to join don't have to. But as we have seen in the dynamic of the Belt and Road Initiative, I mean, this is only there since 7 years. The Belt and Road Initiative is very much in affinity what the Larouche organization has been fighting for almost half a century. And obviously, in 7 years, the dynamic has completely shifted. And if, let's say, the United States and the European nations would stop opposing it, and other countries, like Japan is, always in the middle. On the one side, it's a complex issue. But if these countries who have enormous industrial potentials would say, we agree that this system has to be changed, if you want to stop and overcome the refugee crisis from Africa and Southwest Asia, which is right now another huge crisis building up again for the obvious reasons, from Turkey to Greece, from Libya to Lampedusa. And this is just the beginning. If we want to solve this in a human way and not the way the EU Commission and EU has done it by building up military Frontex to chase the refugees back and build concentration camps in Northern Africa and other places around the Mediterranean, then all countries have to put their efforts together. I mean, look, the permanent wars, the wars based on lies against Iraq, against Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and so forth, the indirect war against Yemen. This has cost, according to President Trump, $7 trillion. Which could have been used for, building up schools, infrastructure, and various things. Now, this has caused millions of people to die, mainly civilians. It has cost thousands of Americans' lives and many other countries as well. So there is now a moral obligation to reconstruct these countries, which have been completely destroyed. You have the images, despite the fact that naturally the local populations are rebuilding immediately the cities and so forth. But there is, if you want to talk about compensation, not for China compensating for the spread of the virus, but for the countries who did these permanent wars, having a moral obligation to participate in the reconstruction of Syria, of Afghanistan, of Iraq. And the only way that can be done is, basically if these four powers stop geopolitics and then all the great neighbors of Southwest Asia work together. I mean, Putin already almost had the combination of forces together last September, where he was talking to all parties, to the Saudis, to the Israelis, the Turks, the Iranians, the Syrians, And that is essentially the approach which you have to take, because you have to take a piece of Westphalia approach to Southwest Asia and the interest of the other, both the economic interest, but also the security interest. If you do that and then take up the offer of President Xi Jinping to extend the new Silk Road from Iran to Iraq to Turkey to Europe, then to Syria, to Egypt, to Africa, and you take this entire region as a section of the world land bridge, then you can solve the problem, because then you create an incentive for all the people to see that the common cooperation is greater than to continue these fights. And if the geopolitical motive behind arming some of these groups stops, you also can defeat terrorism. The same principle applies for Africa. Right now, the African continent is hit by the coronavirus pandemic, a locust plague, which was known since 1 year, but nothing was done to stop it when it could have been eradicated. Now it's threatening to become 500 times bigger than it was in January. It's eating the equivalent of the food for 35,000 people every day. You have a high infection of HIV and tuberculosis. You have malnutrition. And then if you have on top of that these elements, what we discussed before, the pandemic, the famine, I mean, this continent cries out for help. And the only way how we can solve this is by working together. Work together on the projects which would eliminate it. Bring in the farmers from Europe. There are farmers who would be willing to go and help to set up industrial farming in African countries with the consent of the countries, naturally. You have American farmers who could go in and help. You could make investments, a crash program for ports, railway, energy production and distribution, communication. You could start to stop the hunger catastrophe in probably a year or less. And then you can overcome the underdevelopment. We have to make that change. We have to mentally get out of our mind the idea that certain parts of the world will be eternally poor and miserable and have a short life, and babies with big stomachs, with big bellies, but dying of hunger. These images should get us to move and say, this has to stop. And now this crisis is the opportunity to do it. So let's really move on this idea that we need a new paradigm which makes this planet more livable for every single human being who lives here.
We have a statement which underscores what Jacques was saying a few minutes ago about Lyndon LaRouche, and it's from Rhode Island legislator Justin Price.
On this occasion of the 75th anniversary of victory in Europe, I would like to honor the World War II veteran Lyndon LaRouche, who always told the truth about the destruction of our economy, our financial system, and our culture. LaRouche forecasted this kind of disaster that we are in right now with the COVID-19 infection, but more importantly, he created solutions for our nation and our nations of the world. The 4 laws and the 4-power cooperation between the United States, Russia, China, and India. This type of economic, scientific, and cultural cooperation creates a new system which has the need and the power to defeat the old empire system. Lyndon LaRouche was attacked by the same forces that target President Trump in his efforts to create peace and prosperity. The best way to honor Lyndon LaRouche and other veterans is to continue this mission, and I just would like to thank you.
Helga has initiated a project called the LaRouche Legacy Foundation. We've published the first volume of what will be a series of volumes of collected works by Lynn. And Helga, if you'd like to say something about that now, might be a good idea.
Yes, this is something where, everybody who loves the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche should make it a personal issue to acquire this first volume, which is very beautiful. It has the most precious ideas in it, but it's also a very beautiful book. of a series of collected works, which we are absolutely intending to bring out. And Lynn has written at least worth 100 volumes of such books. That is an estimate because he was the most prolific writer I ever knew. He would write 80 pages print ready with footnotes, with everything, so that the editorial would really have nothing to add. And all of these works are of a scope of knowledge, and I'm not saying that because I was married with him, and he's my husband of 41 years, but because it's true. I traveled with him through more than 40 countries. We have met some of the leading people of our times, and really some of the best, who would self-select because they had the courage to meet with him. And I have never found anybody who was as knowledgeable and as creative in the dialogues, coming up with solutions on the spot, on giving people a vision, turning the light on in their souls and minds. Lynn was the most exceptional individual you could have met, and many people know that. So I would say that, help us to spread these books, because I think the study of Lynn's works is the most crucial ingredient to get the world out of this crisis. I think that we should be able to develop a curriculum along his ideas for universities. I think that we need to have a active involvement in mastering the conceptions he has put forward, because they add something to the dimensions of thinking which you do not find in any other thinker. And I have made the comparison that the impact of Lynn being taken for what he has said, which was, as many people know, assaulted by the attacks, as the state legislator just said, the same apparatus which is going and went after President Trump. And that has clouded the view of many people, Larouche, and making him a persona non grata. But that was designed to prevent people from studying these ideas and being lifted up to a completely new level of thinking. So I would encourage people, to really start reading Lynn. And, I think we want to have a new renaissance of thinking. And I'm convinced that if many people start to study Lynn around the world, then, this will be the basis for a new renaissance worldwide. So that is what I want to say about these beautiful books and the ideas of my husband.
Thank you, Helga. Now, if Jacques is still there, I will have him assist us in answering this question, which is actually for Helga, but it's from Ambassador Athanase Budo, ambassador from Burkina Faso to Canada. He says, I have two questions for the May 9th conference, but first I am honored to be associated with this forum, and I would like to express my gratitude to the Schiller Institute for creating and tirelessly pursuing a dynamic toward the reorganization of the world order from the standpoint of equity and of a harmonious development, which takes into account the past and the potentialities of countries. As an African diplomat, the elementary question I would like to ask is, number one, what would be the consequences of this new paradigm, that is, this new Bretton Woods system for Africa? And then number two, what does the Schiller Institute think of France's monetary policy toward its former colonies in Africa? I am obviously referring to the franc zone franc. Thank you. So, is Jacques still there? You are there. Very good.
Yes, I want to say three things. One, just before leaving, but because I have to leave. First, it will bring justice to the African people. It will bring life. Today, as Helga said, these people are going to be killed if we follow the policies that are today the ruling policies. So we need this new paradigm. It means it's a kind of difficult word to understand for some people, paradigm. But this means life. This means human thinking. It means true human labor and cooperation to build something better for our sons and grandsons. It will mean to work for the future generations. So in Africa, it will also mean, and it's not a paradox, coming back to the cultures that define the best moments of Africa. I'm thinking about Cheikh Anta Diop and at his work. I'm thinking of Obenga, who is now the follower of Cheikh Anta Diop, Teofilo Benga, and many others. And this would come back. It will come back with a history of Timbuktu. It will come back with a history of the Egyptian civilization. And we have a whole comeback of this history who will enrich the history of the world. So you have not only people that would be fed, which would be have a decent housing, who have real water, drinking water. Today they have no drinking water. They are telling wash your hands and they have no drinking water. So this should be brought to them, and the same impulse would bring back the highest moments of African culture. And I think these two things make a one, they go together. And I expect with great hope this moment. I hope that it will become before the end of my life, so that I can see at least the beginning of this emergence of these values, which will values common to humanity, and humanity is in a way waiting for this to come from Africa, and Africa is waiting for humanity to help Africa. So it's like giving birth to something really new, a renaissance in that sense. That's one thing. The other thing that I want to, and it's connected to this one, is a question of culture, because Lyndon LaRouche wrote things on culture, in particular music, which are really necessary to go into his thinking and to consider culture what it needs to be what inspires this poesy, which is developed in his book on economics, on his books on economics. So I think I would say that before leaving, people should look at the relation between Leonora and Florestan in Beethoven's Fidelio, look at it from the standpoint of how two persons inspired, and how at the end the people come on stage inspired. So I think that usually happy ends are not really inspiring, because these happy ends tend to be pseudo-romantic. Here it's not at all that. It's something which brings forth the necessity for the future to accomplish what Leonora and Fidelio inspired in a moment of history. And I think you should think about that, considering what is done, as Elga stressed, because she went to see one of these plays and it was a disastrous destruction of the play by these so-called modern artistic inspirations. And we should look at it as it is, and if you look at it as it is, you should think about Leonora and Florestan, and you should think also of the life of Lyndon LaRouche and Elga de Larouche. This is what I wanted to say before leaving.
Thank you very much, Jacques. We really appreciate you being here with us. I know my wife's going to appreciate your references to Egypt, since she's definitely from Upper Egypt. That's another question. Helga, do you have anything to say in response to the question?
Yeah, I think that the effect of the new Bretton Woods for Africa would be that the potential of Africa can be fulfilled. The population is going to be, hopefully, as you know, we can still make it if this new Bretton Woods is being implemented. It will be 2.5 billion people by the year 2050. Now, that will be the largest population, especially because the average age will be probably under 20. That means that you don't have the demographic problems of Germany, for example, or even China, but you will have a continent of young people. And if you give education and decent living standard to all of these young people, it will be the most productive continent on the planet. And we had at the Schiller conference 2 weeks ago, this first astrophysicist from Burkina Faso, and she gave an absolute fantastic inspiration, especially for young girls and young women, that they should study astronomy and other natural sciences. And I think that Xi Jinping hit the nail on the head when he said that if these developments can be implemented, then Africa will be the continent with the largest development potential of all, exactly because of the young age of its people. Now, I think that the possibility that there will be many, many geniuses, like, there will be never again a Beethoven or never again an Einstein, because it's the character of genius that they are unique. But if you start to develop a whole population with a young age, with a positive perspective, with an optimistic idea that they can also leapfrog, there is no reason why the African nations should go through all the stages of industrial development like Europe did in 200 years. They can leapfrog. They can take some of the most advanced areas of work and science and become some of the leading countries in some of these areas. Because once you start to develop, creativity, the degrees of freedom are limitless. Once we start to concentrate our efforts not on war, I mean, the military, eventually, not now, but eventually the military will be superfluous. Because if we organize humankind in such a way that the corps of engineer will not be a corps of engineers of the army, but that they will study, on space science, on, improving the living conditions on the planet, to develop, the fight against all diseases. There are many, many common aims of mankind: the pre-warning of earthquakes, the defense of the planet against asteroids and meteors. There are so many areas where we need the human creativity to kick in and work together. And I think that if the perspective is that the African continent will be the most advanced continent in the future, and I know that there are several African leaders who already are totally committed that they must become a middle income class country very soon. They are not looking for billionaires, but they're looking for a decent living standard for everybody. And if that is going in this direction, I think that is a vision you would want to have every young person in Africa, and stay in Africa, develop a job. As I think it was the president of Ghana told Macron when he visited recently, he said, "We don't want our young people to go through the Sahara and die in the Mediterranean. We want them to stay here and help us building up our great nations." And I think that that is what we have to fight for. So if more voices from Africa come and help to be powerful in this cause, demanding the four-power solution, I think then we can get a big step ahead, because a lot of the crisis will be in Africa, and people will have to listen to the demands from Africa, and it will appeal to the humanity of every single person in Europe, the United States, and other countries around the world.
We're coming into the final moments of our discussion, and this particular thing you've just done, Helga, we're going to show two segments. One is from a lady by the name of Barbara Serstedt. She's a board member of the Framingham, Massachusetts Lomonosov Association for Mutual Exchange. She's a pianist, and she explains who she is in the segment you're about to see. That'll be followed by a segment by Mark Erlenwine. He's the principal of Staten Island Technical High School. This has the largest Russian language program, I believe, in the United States. 1,300 students. Russian is a mandatory language there. We're going to show these, and then I'd like to get reactions, particularly from both you and Diane. Of course, is Jacques still there? Him as well. So we'll show these excerpts now.
I'm a member of the board of directors of FLAME, Framingham Lomonosov Association Mutual Change. It's a sister city organization established between Framingham, Massachusetts and Lomonosov, Russia, over 25 years ago by the late Irving August and Marina Akromova. Sister cities are not political entities. They promote personal relationships among citizens of two countries. In this way, average people may experience another culture and gain an understanding that all people, no matter in what country they live, have common hopes, aspirations for a good life, dreams of a better future for their children. During the time FLAME has been in existence, I myself have traveled between countries of the United States and Russia 14 times. I've spent many weeks living with Russian families, and I've developed many lasting friendships there. FLAME and Kalinka, the Russian counterpart, have exchanged delegations of American and Russian citizens, including teachers, visual artists, and musicians. And there have also been large student musical delegations. We stay in each other's homes and experience the rhythms of ordinary life, as well as the culture of each country. And we've all made close friendships. It would be an incredible turning point if the world's government leaders were to experience the same friendships and the cultural awareness through meaningful discussions and interpersonal relationships. This is no longer just an opinion. It's necessary for the survival of the world that the governments again join forces to combat the common enemies, disease, hunger, and poverty. My late husband and I had a 25-year career as a professional piano duet team. With 4 hands and 2 bodies sharing the space of a single keyboard, it was challenging to stay out of each other's way and to avoid mid-air collisions of our hands. It was also challenging to find a common interpretation of the music because each of us often had a different conception of speed, dynamics, and pedaling, and phrasing. It was necessary to agree in order to present a coherent performance on stage. This required a good deal of compromise, listening to the other person's ideas and staying open to experimenting with them. Often we might end by preferring our partner's interpretation. If we both experienced this at the same time, we'd need to start over. I think our world leaders must find a way to collaborate and compromise if partners in a 4-hand piano performance. Today, as we remember veterans, celebrate the friendships, cooperation, and sacrifices of our parents' and grandparents' generation in joining together to bring about the victory in Europe. Let's find a way to encourage and influence our leaders to work together for a higher ideal, the good of all nations. Thank you.
Здравствуйте. Меня зовут господин Mark Erlenwine, and today is May 8th, Victory Day, and it is so good to be here with my friends here today to talk to you. Welcome. I remember I used to go to a grammar school right down the block from the now Staten Island Tech back in the 80s, Our Lady Queen of Peace. And always being a student who was really interested in mathematics, science, and mostly, computers, technology, music creation. And this is very unlikely to happen in the 1980s. My 8th grade teacher, Sister Kathleen, Catholic nun, pulled me aside. And her job usually is to say, you're going to go to this, Catholic high school on Staten Island. You're not going to the public school. But she told myself and a couple of other students, there's a brand new school down the block, public school. It's called Staten Island Tech. It had no history, but basically its penchant and its focus on what we now call STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Really, we refer to it as STEAM now. We include the A in the arts and everything that we do. She thought that was something that was appealing to me and I should look into. Now, had she had never done that, I probably would have gone to just one of the Catholic high schools in Staten Island, New York. But because she pulled me aside and made that point, my family and I checked out that school. We were really intrigued and interested in everything that they had to say, from the standpoint of learning computer science, engineering in high school, learning Russian, the Russian language, how it was presented to us was really exciting. Being able to go to Russia and live there for about a month and be immersed in the language and the culture was exciting. So from there on it, that's what hooked me. I made the school. I wound up attending. I had an incredible 4 years there. Interestingly enough, after I graduated, I began my studies in English rhetoric and physical therapy. And after becoming an adjunct professor at the College of Staten Island, in the physical therapy department there, and with both of these degrees, it hadn't occupied my whole day. I still had a whole chunk of the day open, the whole beginning of the day. So I always kept in touch with my old high school. As the old story goes, I interviewed for an English position and I walked out with a chemistry position because I had all these qualifications from all my studies in college. And from there on in, started as a science teacher and technology teacher, and was inspired to become a leader. Became an assistant principal, and this is my 7th year as the principal of that school. So I've sat behind every desk in that building, starting from a student to a teacher. I've held all the different roles, many of the different roles you can hold. Supervised many different departments as an assistant principal, and now fortunate enough to lead the school.
As it should be known that the principal was running the high school from his home there. It's 1,300 kids. I don't envy his job. But Helga, you began talking about this before we got to this section. And I'd just like to get your and Diane's response to the idea of what you just saw there about this idea both of cultural exchange, the depth of it. Oh, and Jacques still there too. He can also respond. Because this certainly is something unusual for Americans, but it's obviously something that's very good. So just wanted to have any responses from you, Helga, you, Diane, and then Jacques.
Well, I think that is exactly what is needed because, what Mrs. Surstedt said is it works every time. The moment when you start to look into another culture and, what she said about, getting the rhythm of the other culture, you just learn it. And then you find out it has so many beautiful things. Every time you open your mind and your heart for the specific pearls which are poured in painting, in music, in poetry, it's unbelievable. If you start to look at the poetry of these different countries, it is almost like opening a universe every time. And I think this idea, that Putin expressed in terms of inviting the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and he said something very important. He said, well, we will have video conferences about subjects, but what he wants to introduce is not something which you can do via video or the internet, because he said you have to create an atmosphere where people are encouraged to think and to talk about the fundamental issues of mankind, how we can give ourselves an order which makes our collaboration as a human species possible. And I think what Mrs. Surstedt and also the principal said is exactly the approach you need, because you have to sort of let down your defenses. Don't have don't have pretensions, don't come in with a big macho image or machita image, because that exists also. Just, open your mind and find out about the beauty of the other one and the other culture which comes with it. And all problems can be solved. I'm really very, very optimistic that if more people engage in this, and we had a discussion with young people today earlier, and then one person, I think from Colombia, was asking, if there are any principles we have to absolutely agree upon, to make such a working together possible. And this young person actually suggested two, which I think are absolutely on the mark. I'm not saying these are the only ones, but they are probably the two most important. One is agape, love for mankind, love for the other human being. And the other one is creativity, because if you start to respect the creative mind of the other person, then you have a human relation. And that is exactly what we are trying to build now.
Diane?
I think that part of this question of education is, well, the thing that's delightful and challenging about it is you don't know what the finished product is going to be. As an educator, and I think he expressed the various, the principle, what he had been a student, he had been in math and business, then he ended up becoming the principal. It's very open-ended because you're striving for a certain principle of discovery, which is unending. As one of the scientists, the engineers that we interviewed when we were working on the Nawapa project said, who had been involved in the Three Gorges Dam, he said, well, if you're trying to solve a problem, you solve a problem, but then that makes another problem, and then you have to solve that problem, and that makes another problem, and then you have to solve that problem. And he was very happy about it. The more problems he had, the more happy he became about the challenge that it posed to human creativity. And I think this is really the way that we have to approach this crisis. Not from the standpoint of pessimism, which, as Lynn said, makes you corrupt, but from the standpoint that God would not put us in a universe where things could not be solved, and that there must be a solution, and we're going to figure it out. And to that end, just quickly, I would like to remind our viewers that we have just published on the Schiller Institute website it's called Coronavirus Petition for Global Health Infrastructure, and everyone watching should add their name to this. And this comes from a program that Helga Zepp-LaRouche commissioned called Larouche's Apollo Mission to Defeat the Global Pandemic, Build a World Health System Now. Because as Mike Billington said on the Thursday night call, and also Dr. Jocelyn Elders said in a different way, the COVID-19 virus is not the cause of the pandemic. It's a virus, but the fact that it has become a pandemic was caused by 60 plus years of the post-industrial, anti-scientific, decadent culture. And the way Dr. Elders put it is, yeah, we will have new viruses, but we should be able to prevent them from becoming an epidemic or a pandemic. And I think that's the standard that we really have to take.
Jacques, you have anything for us?
Briefly, because I have to leave, these beautiful contributions for me inspire two things. First, there is a common language of humanity and its translation, and in particular translation of poetry, because true poetry always expresses love for humanity. And the second thing is that when you play piano with two hands, with two other hands, it makes much more than four hands in your mind.
All right. Very good. So we trust that now you're really leaving. So,
Yes,
so
I'm living.
all right. We have a section of offerings for you here now as our conclusion. You're going to hear from Jeremy Kuzmarov, who's the author of several books, and will be reading to us from his article, Oath of the Elbe. Then Al Corby, World War II veteran, friend of Lyndon LaRouche. And then there's a special offering by the Schiller Institute Chorus, which Diane will then tell you all about at its conclusion.
Every year on April 25th, prior to his death from cancer in 1983, Chicago taxi driver Joseph Pulowski would stand on Michigan Avenue and pass out leaflets calling for a halt to the spread of nuclear weapons. When approached by passersby, he would tell them about a historic meeting between American and Russian soldiers at the end of World War II along the Elbe River in Central Europe. He didn't just know the details of the meeting, which marked a crucial step toward the end of the war, he took part in it. Pulowski was a Republican who had served as a rifleman in the 273rd Infantry, 3rd Platoon, 69th Division of the 1st U.S. Army fighting the Nazis. On April 24, 1945, he was called into company headquarters and asked to form a patrol, go 5 miles in front of enemy lines to see if they could get some signs of the Russians. Lieutenant Albert Kotzebue, age 26, was put in charge of the mission since he was of Russian heritage and considered the best platoon leader in the company. When the men reached the Elbe at 11:30 the next day, Kotzebue shot 2 green flares. Russian soldiers in the town of Torgau across the river responded by waving and joyously shouted Amerikansky. The 2 groups then met up and had a historic celebration where they danced to Russian music, they drank vodka, and they basically embraced as comrades. Then they had a nice dinner together in Torgau, and a toast was made to late President Roosevelt, President Truman, Prime Minister Churchill, Marshal Stalin, and everlasting friendship between us all. Pulowski recalled that at the banquet we drank and there were accordions and balalaicas and music and dancing. I was so captivated by the event that it took possession of me for the rest of my life. Another person who participated, Lieutenant Bill Shank, said, of all the experiences in my life, finding and meeting the Russians was the most memorable. This, in many ways, was a high point, one of the high points of the 20th century and a beautiful moment. And actually, correspondent Annie Rooney, who later became famous for 60 Minutes, wrote an article in the Army Stars and Stripes magazine. He wrote, you get the feeling of exuberance, a great new world opening up. And the famous anti-Stalinist Russian poet Yevgeny Yevtushenko wrote in his poem In a Steelworker's Home, true, the great ocean, the Pacific, is between us, but we will swim it. No ocean so great, it cannot become an Elbe. Our common Elbe, we must not betray. Russia and America, swim closer. Well, this is, unfortunately, this message was not adhered to, and this kind of beautiful moment broke down as the Cold War, the Iron Curtain, descended upon Europe after Winston Churchill gave his famous speech in 1946. And this spirit of cooperation, unfortunately, didn't last. And we had the Cold War, which brought a lot of ugliness, including a destructive arms race and McCarthyism in the United States, and the Vietnam War, and Soviet War in Afghanistan. But I think now we're at a crisis point again, just like World War II was a major crisis and watershed in world history. Today we're faced with the calamity of the coronavirus and the public health calamity that has portended. And we also have major world problems such as environmental problems, the continuing problem of terrorism. So I think now is a great time to revive the spirit of the Elbe. And Vladimir Putin himself, in a very recent address, invoked, because we've reached the 75th anniversary of those momentous events, Putin invoked it in a speech, and he said that we've got to revive the spirit of cooperation, and we've got to come together, that the two powers have to work together. We've got to end this animus and the dangerous provocation that both sides have been engaged in, and that we've got to come together to address the world crises today. So I think that's the message. That's a very important message. And I think there is, historical parallel of the U.S. and Russia working together. And that's a message that is very important in the present day. Thank you.
I'm Al Corby. I'm a 95-year-old veteran of World War II. Next to me, you see a portrait that my father had done of me when I was 19 years old, just after I was a year in the Army, home on furlough. When I was 8 years old, Franklin Roosevelt was elected President of the United States. I remember the joy of my mother and father when they heard it on the radio. They had almost lost their house during the Depression because my father's painting and wallpapering business was in a state of decline. I remember a quaver in the voice of my usually self-confident father talking to my mother about the oncoming foreclosure of our house. The name Roosevelt was so new that people were asking how to pronounce it. Then Roosevelt brought the whole economy and my father's business back again. My mother and father always had Roosevelt's fireside chats on the radio. This was something that was never missed. Then, December 7th, 1941. That day was my 17th birthday. I got an early morning phone call from my high school buddy. Pearl Harbor was bombed. Like most people, I didn't know what Pearl Harbor was, but it did spoil my birthday. My buddy and I planned to enlist in the Army when we reached 18. We did, I in the Army Air Corps. I was sent to basic training in Miami, Florida as an Air Force armorer, maintaining the armaments of B-24 bombers called the Liberator bomber. I then served as an instructor to other armorers in other U.S. states before being sent to Okinawa to bomb Japan. But on the way to Okinawa, the atom bombing of Japan took place, which ended conventional bombing. So today, at 95 years of age, I am in my garden in New Jersey planting flower seeds and reading the latest books of Lyndon Larouche, both of which are giving me joy. I suspect that there are others in other parts of the world who are doing the same because it is a human thing to do. Now, because of the studies of Lyndon Larouche, I realize that the war I had been through had been set into motion by the looting of Europe after World War I, contrived by those that believe in theft rather than production, in the method of empire, whether British or Nazi, the method which kills and maims, rather than the natural human endeavor of the joy of meeting new people from every corner of the planet, of sharing new discoveries and ideas, of having fun. On the 75th anniversary of the defeat of fascism in Europe, I hope we will be wise enough to bring our nations together in space exploration, in medical breakthroughs, and in implementing Roosevelt's freedom from want, which has been still denied to the former colonial world. This is our unfinished fight for freedom. Al Corby, May 9th, 2020.
So, Diane, would you like to tell people what they just saw?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, this was a collaboration of the Schiller Institute NYC Chorus as part of a promotional being prepared by RT for the VE Day celebrations. And they had Russian choruses. I heard a Russian chorus singing Waltzing Matilda, an Australian chorus singing a Russian song, and so on. And we were asked to participate, which was a challenge because of the social distancing. But I'll just tell you the translation of this song into English. You'll see why partly it, I think, resonated so much with people. Tri tankista, that's the three tankmen, tri veselých druga, three merry friends, the crew of a war machine. And they keep saying this song stands as a testimony. And I did really appreciate the image given to us by the person who described what it was like to be at the meeting of the Elbe and the celebration of the music and the dancing. You hear this, but at any rate, they say I'll skip a few verses. So it's the three tankmen. On the grass lay heavy dew, widespread fog descended. On that night, the enemy troops decided to cross the border at the river, but the intelligence reported it accurately, and the crew raised up. Over the far eastern homeland went the armored attack battalion. The tanks raced, the wind getting up, formidable armor was advancing, and the enemy troop was driven to the ground under the pressure of steel and fire. They were victorious. The song stands as testimony. The three tankmen, the three cheerful friends, the crew of a war machine. So we should have a world of many cheerful friends to defeat the ugliness of the old paradigm, which we can see in this pandemic before us.
So, Helga, we're now down at the final minutes, and obviously we've seen a lot. We've talked about a lot, and I'd like you to give us some summary remarks.
Well, I think it was a real pleasure and joy to be in this meeting where so many beautiful souls were speaking. And I was, when Dr. Killmacher spoke about the future of civilization where more people will live in space than on the planet, I think that is definitely the way. And, we can only do that when we work together. Kraft Ericke, the great German-American rocket scientist, he said, the extraterrestrial imperative is what will mean a new stage in the evolution of mankind. And I believe that mankind is capable of reason. And I was especially moved by the words of Al Corby, who has such an incredible comprehension of what Lynn represented. And I can only encourage that everybody should follow the great example of Al Corby and find joy in the reading of the books of Lynn. So I feel that, what we started the meeting with is, a hard look, World War II, the missed opportunity of the spirit of the Elbe, a Cold War. Now we are on the verge of a potential Third World War, which would mean the extinction of civilization. And we see the result of the wrong economic policies of the last really 70 years, which was warned by Lynn. And now we are here. He is only gone from us for about a good year. And all he has said is now here. So I think that we have to really take the strengths, which I think was demonstrated in this meeting by the beautiful contributions by really loving people, and take that emotional quality to transform the society around us. And I think that the possibility of mankind to overcome any challenge is absolutely there. I agree with Diane. This is actually Leibniz's idea of the best of all possible worlds. Not that you don't have challenges, but that there is an innate goodness in people, that when they are confronted with a great evil, they can come forth with an even greater goodness. And that is the virus which we have to spread, make it infectious, so that eventually the force of love becomes stronger than the force of hatred and of evil. So if we go out with that conclusion out of this discussion, we have revived the spirit of the Elbe, and that will be a good thing.
Thank you, Helga. I want to thank everybody for joining us today for this commemoration and celebration. Friedrich Schiller once observed that mankind is always greater than its destiny, because there is no such thing as a destiny that cannot be changed. And I think that we've done something today to change what might have seemed to be the tragic course of events that we've all been living through. And we invite all of you to join us in making that change as well. So on behalf of the Schiller Institute, I'm Dennis Speed. We'll see you next time.